In March 2020, the world was forced to stay home, and the internet had to absorb all of it at once. Video conferencing traffic, Zoom, Teams, WebEx, spiked within a week, in some networks by several hundred to several thousand%. Streaming traffic roughly doubled in parts of the world. Overall broadband demand rose 15 to 20%, almost overnight.
And for the first time at real scale, the traffic wasn't just flowing down. Video conferencing is interactive. You're not just watching, you're being watched in real time by a room full of coworkers or students or family. That meant upload traffic, not just download, surged in a way the network was never built for.
This is the asymmetry problem from Act 4. The wire built to send data one direction, fast download, slow upload, because nobody in 2001 needed to send much of anything back.
Millions of people needed to send a face in real time at the same moment every weekday morning, and mostly the network held. Infrastructure built up over 2 decades of duopoly and shaming campaigns and frozen federal money absorbed the largest simultaneous demand shock in its history without collapsing. That is, in its own way, evidence that the fights we've spent 5 acts describing actually built something.
But 2020 wasn't just a stress test for the pipes. It was a preview of who was about to start building new ones. In 2025, Meta, the company that used to be Facebook, announced a project called Waterworth, a single undersea cable 50,000 kilometers long, circling the entire continent of Africa, crossing the Indian Ocean, rounding Southeast Asia, traversing the Pacific, and making landfall in the United States. Estimated cost? $10 billion. $10 billion. And the critical detail, the one that separates this from every major undersea cable project before it, is ownership. Meta would own the cable outright. No telecom partner, no government consortium, no shared capacity arrangement with carriers or sovereign nations. One private company, one cable, sole ownership, encircling a continent.
20 years ago, the undersea cable map looked completely different. In the early 2000s, the vast majority of intercontinental cables were built and owned by telecommunications carriers. Companies like AT&T, British Telecom, NTT in Japan, Telia in Scandinavia. These were telecom consortia, sometimes involving dozens of carriers from multiple countries pooling capital, sharing capacity, and operating under regulatory frameworks that treated undersea cables as shared infrastructure. The model resembled loosely how airlines share airport gates. The assets served multiple operators, and no single entity controlled access. That model is gone. Or rather, it's being replaced. As of 2024, 4 companies, Meta, Google, Microsoft, and Amazon, control approximately 50% of global undersea cable capacity, not through consortia, through direct ownership or majority investment in cables they commissioned, designed, and built for their own traffic. The carriers that used to dominate this layer of infrastructure are being displaced by the companies whose data flows through it.
The companies that needed the pipes bought the pipes.
They built new ones, and the economics explain why. These 4 companies generate such extraordinary volumes of data traffic: cloud computing, video streaming, social media, AI model training, that leasing capacity from telecom carriers became more expensive than constructing their own cables. So they did. Google alone has invested in at least 24 subsea cable systems. Amazon's cable network serves its AWS cloud infrastructure across every major ocean. Microsoft has built routes specifically to connect its Azure data centers on different continents. But Meta's Waterworth represents something beyond cost optimization. When a telecom consortium builds a cable, landing rights are negotiated with sovereign governments. Capacity is allocated across multiple operators. Regulatory oversight exists at each landing point. When a single company builds a $10 billion cable that it owns outright, with landing points on multiple continents, the questions of jurisdiction, access, and control become genuinely novel. Whose law governs the data in transit? Who decides if a nation gets disconnected? Who grants or denies access to capacity?
Those used to be questions for treaties. Now they're questions for a corporate board in Menlo Park.
And Meta is not unique. It's simply the most explicit. The shift from consortium-owned to corporate-owned undersea infrastructure has happened gradually enough that most people haven't registered it. But the result is that the physical backbone of the global internet, the actual glass fibers lying on the ocean floor that carry 95% of intercontinental data, is migrating from shared infrastructure, governed by international agreements, to private infrastructure, governed by corporate investment decisions. The ocean floor is one layer of this, but there's another layer, one that didn't exist for most of the internet's history, and it raises a different set of questions entirely about who controls access from above. SpaceX's Starlink constellation. As of early 2025, more than 4,000 satellites in orbit, with plans for tens of thousands more. The premise is straightforward. Beam internet access from satellites directly to small ground terminals, bypassing terrestrial infrastructure entirely. No fiber trench, no utility pole, no last mile. Or rather, the last mile comes from space. Starlink has connected rural communities in dozens of countries where terrestrial broadband never arrived. It provides service on ships, on aircraft, in disaster zones. It has delivered genuine connectivity to populations the market failed.
And it has also become a weapon of war.
In February 2022, Russia invaded Ukraine. Within days, Ukrainian telecommunications infrastructure was severely degraded, cell towers destroyed, fiber lines cut, internet exchange points knocked offline. Mikhailo Fedorov, Ukraine's Minister of Digital Transformation, tweeted directly at Elon Musk requesting Starlink terminals. Musk responded within hours. Terminals arrived within days. Starlink became a critical communications backbone for the Ukrainian military, coordinating drone operations, maintaining command and control links, enabling real-time intelligence sharing. A private satellite network owned by a single individual became battlefield infrastructure for a nation at war. And then the owner of that network started making decisions about where it worked and where it didn't.
In September 2023, reporting, including from Walter Isaacson's biography of Musk, revealed that Starlink's coverage had been geofenced in ways that directly affected Ukrainian military operations. Geofencing means drawing a digital boundary around a geographic area and restricting or enabling service within it. Coverage near Crimea was reportedly limited or disabled at critical moments. The specifics remain disputed, but the structural fact is not. One individual controlling a private satellite constellation had the technical ability to enable or restrict internet access over an active war zone. And that individual was not a head of state, not a military commander, not bound by any treaty or chain of command.
A private citizen deciding the communications topology of a battlefield.
That is without precedent. In every prior conflict of the Internet era, communications infrastructure was either state-owned, operated by regulated carriers under government authority,
or governed by international humanitarian law regarding civilian infrastructure. Starlink exists outside all three frameworks. It is private property in orbit, providing a service that nations have come to depend on, operated at the discretion of its owner.
And unlike a cable on the ocean floor, you can't send a ship to inspect it. You can't splice into it. You can't nationalize a satellite constellation. The infrastructure is in orbit. The ground terminals are in your country. The kill switch is in Hawthorne, California. And Starlink isn't the only satellite network anymore either.
Amazon's Project Kuiper began full-scale deployment in April 2025. By that October, it had roughly 150 satellites in orbit, a fraction of Starlink's, which had passed 7,000. The FCC requires Amazon to deploy a large share of its planned constellation by mid-2026 or risk losing its license. Kuiper is real, but it is years behind.
A different kind of competitor is coming from a different angle entirely.
AST SpaceMobile doesn't compete with your phone company, it sells to it. The company's satellites connect directly to ordinary, unmodified smartphones. No dish, no terminal, just a regular phone talking to a satellite as if it were a cell tower in the sky. AT&T and Verizon have both signed commercial agreements with AST to extend their own networks using AST's satellites rather than build computing infrastructure themselves.
So one model replaces the carrier. The other model rents itself out to the carrier.
Which means the same question that applies to Starlink, who controls the switch, applies differently depending on which model wins. A Starlink-style constellation answers to one company alone. An AST-style constellation answers to whichever carriers it's under contract with. A different, more distributed kind of leverage, but leverage all the same. Now turn the lens east. China's approach to this same set of questions, who controls the internet, who decides what flows through it, is not new, and it was never subtle. But its maturity by the 2020s represents something the original architects of the internet never designed for, a fully realized alternative model. The Great Firewall, the informal name for China's system of internet censorship and surveillance, has been operational in various forms since the late 1990s, but describing it as censorship understates what it has become. By 2024, it is a comprehensive system of traffic inspection, content filtering, DNS manipulation, redirecting the address lookups that tell your device where a website actually lives, VPN blocking, meaning the encrypted tunnels people use to route around restrictions are actively detected and disabled, and real-time algorithmic monitoring that effectively creates a separate internet within China's borders. Chinese users access domestic platforms, Baidu instead of Google, Weibo instead of Twitter, WeChat instead of WhatsApp, Douyin instead of TikTok's international version. The global internet exists on the other side of the firewall. Most Chinese users cannot reach it without technical circumvention tools that the state actively detects and blocks.
When people say the internet, they're already describing two different things depending on which side of that firewall they're standing on.
The result is two distinct internets. And the significance isn't just that Chinese users see different content, it's that the entire commercial ecosystem, the advertising models, the payment systems, the app stores, the recommendation algorithms, the data storage, operates within a sovereign boundary. China has demonstrated, at the scale of 1.4 billion people, that the internet does not have to be global. It can be national. It can be segmented. It can be controlled. And that model is exportable. China has provided internet infrastructure, surveillance technology, and content management systems to governments across Southeast Asia, Central Asia, and Africa. The infrastructure investments associated with the Belt and Road Initiative include fiber optic cable construction in countries that previously depended on Western-built networks. The result is not necessarily the replication of the Great Firewall elsewhere, but the creation of a viable alternative architecture, a proof of concept that other governments can study and adapt.
So you have corporate-owned cables on the ocean floor, a private satellite network in orbit, and a state-controlled internet serving a fifth of the world's population. 3 models. None of them look like what those researchers at ARPA designed.
The Internet's original architecture was decentralized by intent. No single point of failure, no central authority, no choke point where one entity could control traffic. That architecture still exists at the protocol level. TCP/IP still works the way it always did, but the physical and commercial layers built on top of it have reconcentrated control to a degree the protocol's designers explicitly tried to prevent.
There's one more group we haven't accounted for: the people who aren't on any version of it.
2.21 billion. As of the most recent ITU data, 2.21 billion people globally remain unconnected to the Internet. Disproportionately in sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, and parts of Southeast Asia, disproportionately women, disproportionately rural, disproportionately poor.
A third of the human species.
And the way the next billion of those people come online will determine what the Internet becomes more than any corporate investment or government regulation in the developed world. Because the next billion users will not be desktop users. They will not be broadband users. They will not arrive through fiber or cable or DSL. They will arrive through mobile phones, inexpensive smartphones on cellular networks, often prepaid, often with data caps that make certain types of content accessible and others prohibitively expensive.
That means the internet they experience is not the internet we've been describing.
It is not. A user on a data-capped mobile connection in Lagos or Dhaka does not experience the open web. They experience the apps and services that are zero-rated, meaning the mobile carrier has struck a deal with a specific platform to exempt its data from the cap. Facebook's Free Basics program, which operates in dozens of countries, gives users access to a curated selection of websites and services without counting against their data plan. The Internet, for that user, is Facebook. It is the walled garden we described in earlier acts, not through the mechanism of a dial-up login screen, but through the mechanism of economic access.
The escape hatch that kept opening, the one that let the open internet survive every time someone tried to close it, that hatch depends on having an alternative to go to. If your only affordable access point is a single platform, there is no alternative.
And that is the structural risk. The next billion users arrive on terms set not by protocol designers, or government policy, or even their own choices, but by the commercial arrangements between mobile carriers and platform companies. The Internet those users encounter is not a network of networks. It is a menu of services someone else selected.
So here's where all 6 acts lead. Every cycle we've traced, ARPANET to Mosaic, the BBS Underground to AOL's Walled Garden, AOL's collapse into broadband, the duopoly through the iPhone, Google Fiber through the frozen 65 billion, every cycle followed the same pattern. Someone concentrates control. The open network finds an escape route. The open network survives.
And in every prior cycle,
The escape route existed because an alternative was technically possible and economically viable. The open internet escaped AOL because broadband provided a different on-ramp. It escaped the duopoly's throttling because smartphones created a parallel access point. It escaped the last-mile problem in developed countries because the technology to build faster networks existed, and competitive pressure, even temporary pressure, even the bluff of Google Fiber, forced incumbents to deploy it. But look at the current landscape. The physical infrastructure of the global internet is consolidating into the hands of 4 or 5 companies and one authoritarian state. The orbital layer is controlled by a single private entity. The next billion users are arriving through a gate that a platform company holds open, or doesn't. The largest public investment ever designed to close the domestic access gap is frozen, and the 2 largest populations on Earth are operating on increasingly separate networks with incompatible rules about speech, commerce, surveillance, and control.
Every prior escape hatch required a technical alternative or a government willing to fund one. Right now, both of those are narrowing.
Which is why this moment is unlike the others. The internet has always been contested. It has always been a negotiation between openness and control, between public infrastructure and private investment, between the protocol's democratic design and the commercial incentives layered on top of it. That negotiation has been the story of every act in this series. It is the story of the internet itself. But the terms of the negotiation have shifted. When the government was the primary builder, in the ARPANET era, in the Gore era, the public had leverage through elected officials and appropriations votes. When the carriers were the primary builders, the public had leverage through regulation. The FCC, the Telecommunications Act, the threat of common carrier obligations. When the platforms became the primary builders, the public's leverage became what, exactly? Antitrust cases that take a decade? Shareholder resolutions? Tweets at a CEO?
The infrastructure moved further from democratic accountability with every act.
And closer to the discretion of whoever writes the largest check. That is the trajectory. ARPA wrote the check in 1969. Gore wrote the check in 1991. The carriers wrote the check in the 2000s. And now, Google, Meta, Microsoft, Amazon, SpaceX, and China are writing the checks. The infrastructure follows the money. It always has. The question is whether the public, any public in any country, retains enough structural power to shape where that infrastructure goes, on what terms, and for whom.
The cables are already on the ocean floor. The satellites are already in orbit. The plans are already drawn. The money is already committed, or frozen.
Go back to what we opened this series with, Gore's actual words. I took the initiative in creating the internet, not invented it. He never claimed that, and he was right not to. He didn't write a line of code. He didn't build a server or design a protocol. He couldn't have. Cerf and Khan were doing that. What he did was see before almost anyone else in government that this thing deserved real federal money, and he was in a position to get it appropriated. The Gore Bill in 1991, funding that expanded NSFNet into the backbone that Mosaic ran on.
And everything since has been built on top of that on-ramp by people who owed Gore nothing and mostly never thought about him. AOL turned it into a mass consumer product. Google turned it into the default way the world finds information. Now it's SpaceX putting the on-ramp in orbit, and 4 or 5 companies laying the cable underneath the ocean. None of them needed Gore's permission. None of them were finishing his plan. They were building on infrastructure that existed because, in 1991, somebody in government decided it was worth paying for.
That's the whole distinction. He didn't build the thing. He never said he did. What he did was recognize it early enough and push hard enough that there was a network worth building on top of by the time AOL and Google and Musk showed up. And then the question became, who gets to run it? We keep asking that question. We keep getting different answers. The current answer is the most consequential one yet, and most people aren't paying attention to it.
Pulse Deep Dive presents Al Gore Invented the Internet, produced by Singularity Pulse Network. This series is for informational and educational purposes only. Historical accounts are sourced from published research, reporting, and public record. Some timelines are condensed for narrative clarity. Nothing in this series constitutes legal, financial, or technical advice. Views expressed are those of the hosts and do not represent the positions of any organization mentioned.
Origins is a different kind of show. Every Sunday, we investigate the forces that shape the modern world, the geography, the science, the commerce, the decisions made centuries ago that are still playing out today. Find it wherever you listen to this podcast.
I'm Caden. The Pulse Brief is every weekday, 10 minutes. AI, space, crypto, cybersecurity, what matters most today? Find it wherever you listen.